Hi, welcome to the latest episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I'm Ray,
And I'm Chris.
and we're going to be hitting a pretty relevant topic at the time of the recording anyway, and that is the health of presidents. When we're recording this episode, one of the big stories in the news is former President Joe Biden and his diagnosis of stage 4 prostate cancer, and people wondering, when did he know? What did he know? Why wasn't the public informed and all that? And so we thought we would take a few minutes to go back in presidential history and look at some presidents, some lesser known, some better known, who maybe weren't that forthcoming with diagnoses and health conditions.
And one of the things that we think about when it comes to the president of the United States is we think that he is a symbol of American freedom, that, he is the number one citizen, if you will, of the United States. And Ray, he is surrounded by Secret Service 24/7. He has an automobile that is the only one that is named the Beast. He has his own plane, his own helicopter, his own chef, and he even has his own personal physician who is right there at the White House, right there with him pretty much wherever he goes. The White House physician is close by in case there is a particular situation. And, I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit later, but during the COVID pandemic, when President Trump was found to be with COVID, and, all of America stopped at that moment because, we knew what COVID was doing then, and to know that a president had been impacted. It's good to have a physician, not just any physician, but one of the best physicians, and to have all of the medical equipment around. The White House has its own, if you will, infirmary, its own little hospital wing. Plus, the president's place is, I think, Walter Reed Naval Hospital, where they can get him too quick if they need it. So, yes, it's surprising when a diagnosis comes out of a president, because Ray, even though we know it's not true, we seem to think that presidents are invincible and that they can't get injured, they can't get hurt, and surely they can't have medical diagnosis.
Yeah. And, I think sometimes people have this idea that when a person's president, anything and everything that can be done to check, to test, to screen will be done. And that's just simply not the case. In the case of Joe Biden here, it appears that he hadn't had a prostate test since 2014 due to his age, I suppose. But it just goes to show that even with someone who has the best medical care in the world, it's only as good as how it's applied, I guess is the word. If a doctor doesn't test for it, they won't find it.
And it's just hard to believe, though. I mean,
Yeah.
when we go to the doctor, the doctors are very adamant about you need this and you need that. And, we listen to the doctors, but I would think with the president of the United States, he has so many people who you would think that those tests would not go, not being administered, especially with the age. And I don't know his family history and things of that nature, but it just makes you concerned that here we are and we have found these things out concerning the president. And you said 2014. I mean, right?
That's 11 years.
11 years. I mean, there's something to be said about that.
Yeah. I mean, especially when you're talking about someone his age, when you get over, 60, 65, the chance of having that kind of diagnosis dramatically increases. Why are you going to? I know there's recommendations from these health organizations about when you should cut off testing and stuff, but my personal view, and Chris, you can disagree, listeners can disagree, but if you're president in the United States, that, in my opinion, that cutoff guideline doesn't apply.
Yeah, I would think, I know we talked about during the presidential election, they were talking about cognitive tests and wanting to do all of these medical things. And I understand and support not releasing that information because the president is a human being after all. I get that. But doesn't mean that he shouldn't still have those tests. And, we're starting to find out kind of after the presidency. And this is, by the way, to our listeners, this is not a knock on President Biden. This is not a
No.
knock on us. This is just talking about things that have happened in history recently. But, we're now starting to find out that maybe there was, I don't want to use the word cover up. That's the wrong terminology, but there were some facts that people knew about that they were not letting the whole world know. And that is concerning because
Mhm.
if he was in a stage of cognitive decline, I think it's important for some people to know who are in power, who can help guide those decisions and make sure that you don't want a president who is suffering with a medical situation to still be in charge of the commanding forces of the United States military or a nuclear weapon or just, anything of that nature.
Yeah, you certainly don't want it to be cognitive. So I thought we would sort of go back, and I don't know, Chris and I never talk about these episodes before we record them. I know there's some podcasters out there that script everything and, you know, pre-meet and all this stuff. We don't do that partly because we don't have time.
That's
But
true.
the other part of it is that I think it's better. I think we both think it's better that, we just sort of fly off the cuff with these things, and whatever it is, what it will be, what it will be. So I just thought we'd go back and look at some presidents. I don't know which ones Chris has sort of looked into. There's a few that I think are very interesting, Chris. If you will let me start, is Chester Arthur. Chester Arthur, he was elected vice president in 1880 under James Garfield, and Garfield becomes president in March of 1881. Arthur becomes vice president in March of 1881. July comes along. James Garfield's trying to get out of D.C. is shot by Charles Gouteau, and he dies in September. Garfield does, making Chester Arthur president. Now, I don't think anybody would ever have accused Chester Arthur of working overtime or, putting too much effort into his work, but he did like to socialize. He was a social butterfly. And then sometime in early 1882, they begin to notice he began to pull back on some of his social engagements. He seemed more fatigued. His appetite left him. He lost weight. And Chris, at some point in the fall of 1882, I believe, they decide to, and I don't know how they do it, maybe you do, but they decide to test his urine for some sort of protein or something. And they diagnose him with a disease which no longer is no longer called this today, called Bright's disease, which was a fatal diagnosis in 1882. And, he's going to be president until what, 1885? Nobody knows. The public is not, they're not told that the president has a fatal illness. In fact, at one point, he goes down to Florida thinking, I guess, that the heat and humidity would help. I can't think of a single thing heat and humidity would help. But, they used to think, if you had TB or whatever, you'd go down to the Caribbean, these tropical places, and that they would help your condition. He almost dies while he's in Florida. But he does survive the entire term as president, and he dies a few months after leaving office. He was pretty young, I think his early 50s, mid 50s when he died. But it's an example there. There's several other examples where the public was kept out of the loop, deliberately so, about what was going on with the president.
Yeah, and that kind of leads to the one that I would share, which is we've done a podcast on this individual before. We've gone in depth with it, so I'll encourage our listeners to go back and find the episode on Grover Cleveland, who just has a lot of interesting history just about him. But he was entering his second term as president, and he noticed that there was something going on at the roof of his mouth, and so he had the physicians kind of look at it and kind of just took a look and said, "Oh my gracious, you have this huge," he described as a cauliflower lesion that was on the roof of his mouth, and said, "Mr. President, there's no time to waste. This is something that you're going to have to do. You're going to have surgery, and it's serious surgery, and we need to do it immediately." And have to understand that they didn't want the cat out of the bag, if you will, because the nation was undergoing a serious depression. It had just started with the Great Depression, or not the Great Depression, but a nationwide depression. And to strengthen the economy, the president was trying to do some things. He was out in public. He was repealing the Sherman Silver Trust Act, and he was trying to uphold the gold standard. And, he has to address Congress. And so what they do is they go and have a secret surgery that is aboard a yacht that is off. They do all that they can to get him there, so that nobody knows what is going on. And you have the president who undergoes anesthesia, which technically, Ray, at this time, when the president goes under anesthesia, then the vice president should take over as president of the United States, because the president is not alert. He's not able to cognitively function and to make decisions. So all of these things are going on, and the media gets wind that here's all these weird people are going to a boat, and it's rumored that the president's on a boat. And there's a lot of talk that's going on. And basically, it comes back that the White House says, oh, nothing's wrong. He's just got a toothache. And so the dentist is on board trying to help him. And it was very, very serious, because the surgery takes an hour and a half. And what happens is they have to go through speech therapy with the president. He has to really do everything all over again. And it is said that basically he wasn't the same after that surgery, and people knew that something happened. But they were so scared that if the nation knew that the president of the United States was experiencing significant health issues, that the nation could find itself in a serious situation. So they kept it secret. That's just another quick story of a president who had an illness.
Yeah, one thing that I think both Chester Arthur and Grover Cleveland have in common is, Chester Arthur becomes president because Garfield was assassinated. So the idea is the nation's already dealt with this. Let's not do it again. A president dying in office. And I guess that was probably some of the, with the financial concerns and things like that with Cleveland.
And, there's a little bit of time that goes on. Of course, we've covered about assassination attempts, or, about William Henry Harrison and kind of catching, pneumonia really wasn't, all of those things. But there's really a period of time that goes where we don't see an illness that is kept secret, I guess, if you will. And probably everybody recognizes the next one, and that is Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And, that is one that went to extreme ends to try to keep secret. And, that basically comes to the fact that he found out that he had polio. And, to just kind of move past, one of the things that was interesting is that Roosevelt's aides were insistent that no photographs be taken of President Roosevelt. People knew, people understood, but those who were in close contact knew pictures were not to be given or to be taken, because they were afraid of what kind of symbol that would show. You have to understand, World War II, things of that nature. If they find out that the president of the United States is in a wheelchair, not that there is anything wrong with that, but images is what the White House was concerned with. And so they made all of these very strong maneuvers to try to ensure that the president was sitting in a chair when the people came in, or he was, in a position where he didn't have to move. He had a blanket over his lap, or whatever it might be, just to try to hide Franklin Delano Roosevelt's illness.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that was the media was cooperative. I mean, I cannot imagine, a presidential administration looking at the media today and go, shh, don't video this, don't take a picture of this, don't tell people. I can't imagine the media doing that today.
Absolutely not. And, the idea is that Democratic leaders knew that Roosevelt's health was in decline. They knew that Roosevelt was suffering. And yet, even though they were worried that he might not survive a fourth term, they were still willing to kind of put him on the ticket and to go ahead, because of what he had done for the party because of the allegiance that he was owed. There's a lot of that could be a great discussion about. They felt that he was owed loyalty, and so they were willing to kind of put him on another ticket. Whereas if you look at the previous election that we've just covered with President Biden, they didn't feel that they owed that president any loyalty. They felt that he was a danger to keeping on the ticket, and they kind of quietly removed him from the process. So you can kind of see that that is a different way of handling things. But and I go back to Roosevelt. Roosevelt says, "Yes, sir, we're going to allow you to be renominated," and he agreed to it.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of goes to that power that gets in on some people, where he was willing to say, "Sure, go ahead, put me on." He accepted the nomination, although he did it, I think, in a radio address,
Yeah.
to where he was not around.
Yeah, and he didn't live long once past that fourth inauguration, was it? Not long.
No, in April 12th of 1945
So a little over a
is
month.
when he suffers that massive stroke. And,
Mm-hmm.
Basically they tried to take care of him, but he died. And so, that was a serious thing, because now we're moving forward in American history where you have technology that is
Yep.
advanced, the cameras,
Mhm.
the other things that are recordings that was a lot different with Arthur and with Cleveland and things of that
Yep.
nature. But Ray, things really come to a head even after Roosevelt, and that's with the president, the youngest president of the United States, President John F. Kennedy, who comes into power.
Yeah, John F. Kennedy. When you look at videos, I'm certain, if our audience has not seen the debate between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon in 1960, the first televised presidential debate, I think, and there's John Kennedy looking. He's a senator. He's looking young. He's looking, like he's ready for the job on day one. And then you got Vice President Nixon, who's serving under Dwight Eisenhower, and he's had the flu and he's unshaven. He looks poorly kept, and people who watched the debate said, Kennedy carried the day. But people who listened to it thought that no, Nixon may have actually done a better job. But just the image of the young, energetic, youthful John F. Kennedy, sort of won the day in that debate. But it was a bit of a deception because he had some medical issues that they weren't being forthcoming about.
No, and they, I remember there was two authors who were trying to write a biography of Kennedy during his time, and the White House kept secret. They wouldn't allow his medical records to be released, and it come to find out that he had what was known as Addison's disease, which is a disorder of the adrenal glands, and basically any individual who had Addison's disease exhibited lethargy. They had loss of appetite, pain in the stomach. They had a discoloration of skin, more of a yellowish tint to your skin. And to hide this, they went back and talked about Kennedy's heroics with when he was in the military. He was in the Navy, part of, I think, Kennedy's boat. I think it was like PT 109, I think. And, he was responsible for leading a crew to safety after being attacked. And they said, well, during that time, he caught malaria and he became very, very sick. But Ray, there was one instance that with his Addison's disease, that they would have cortisone and other medication in safety deposit boxes all around the country, so that whenever the president would travel, if they needed it, they had quick access, because that is what would basically help him control the disease that he was having. But he was still plagued with back disease also, which kind of came along with this. He needed to have surgery for his back. He had complications. There was an infection in his back. And I found I didn't know this until we started reading about it, studying about it for this podcast, that after that serious back surgery, he developed an infection in his back, and they thought that he was going to die, to the point where the Catholic Church came and gave him his last rites because of a fear that he wasn't going to make it.
Wow. And he was on some heavy drugs.
Mm-hmm. And, a lot of that comes and says that based on some of his actions, some of the things that he did during his presidency, kind of some of the swirling rumors and things of that nature. That a lot of it was because he was trying to hide a disease, and while trying to hide a disease, there were other things that he was trying to hide. But Kennedy, even once again, as he was fighting for the presidency, the question came up about him having Addison's disease, and they denied it. They said, no, that's not true. He's just got a little problem. There's nothing really going on. But yet, tests showed that he did have it. It was just trying to hide it so that he could get elected.
Yep. Last one. I guess will be the last one we cover. We're not covering all of them. We would be here all day. But the last one, I guess we got to talk about, Chris, is Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, of course, was elected president in 1980 for the first time, defeated Jimmy Carter. He's inaugurated in 1981, but sometime later, not long after his inauguration, he's shot in the side. And of course, everybody's seen the video, I hope, where he's pushed into the limousine and quickly rushed to the hospital. One of the things that I think has come out in the years since that is he was far more critical than the media and the administration let on at the time. That he was in critical condition, with internal bleeding, with punctured lung, and that kind of thing. I think they sort of tried to put a better face on it, which is understandable, but they tried to put a better face on his condition than what it actually was.
And I think it just goes to show that we ask, well, why did they keep it quiet? Why did they keep it secret? Well, Ray, many people would not vote for someone if they knew they had a grave medical situation or if they had a problem or something that was going on. So I do think it's important, to kind of understand why, not justifying it, not saying that it's right, but demonstrating why it is that these things happen. So it's pretty good history of some of the things that have taken place with our presidents. And who knows, these are just the ones we know about. I'm sure there's a lot of other things that we're not aware of, especially in our early presidents.
Oh, of course. I mean, you talk about Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe. I mean, what was going on behind the scenes of some of those? I mean, we know with some of Washington's early health struggles when he was in the presidency. One we didn't talk about that I sort of wanted to get to, Chris, was Woodrow Wilson. Now, everybody knew about the stroke and we did an episode, didn't we, on Woodrow Wilson and his stroke. And I think we talked about in that episode, correct me if I'm wrong, that he had multiple strokes throughout his life, that he had some sort of stroke condition. Woodrow Wilson, of course, is president during World War I. At the end of the war, he goes to Versailles to, what was his 14 points. And he wanted to see the United States play a big role in the end of the war and the negotiations at the end of the war. While he's there in 1919, he contracts Spanish flu, which the United States, like most other countries, all other countries involved in the war, really didn't talk about. They didn't talk about the struggles they were having with Spanish flu, fearing its backlash on the war. Spain, of course, was neutral. So we got problems with the flu. Wilson goes over there. He gets so sick with the flu, with the Spanish flu, that his personality changes. And there are people who say that, he didn't get some of the things he wanted because he sort of gave it up because he didn't feel good.
Yeah. And you just go back and you think, we go and talk about, he's got hypertension. He then develops these strokes. And one of the things that is interesting is there is actual evidence of a cover-up with Wilson's second wife and with the White House physician, and trying to make sure that nobody is aware of just how bad it was. They didn't even tell Wilson how bad his situation was. And they kept that from him because thought he would go around and tell, or he would do something drastic. Once again, it is interesting. You see the wife of the president kind of taking ownership over what information is disclosed, what information is not. Once again, kind of into the recent presidential election, we see some of that.
And what's interesting is when he was in Versailles and word was going back to the United States, what was going on, they were like, oh, he's just got a cold. He just doesn't feel good. He's fine. He's under the weather. Meanwhile, he's in there. One of the doctors talked about how, how sick he was. And it was just terrible. They were really worried, but people didn't know about it because they kept that hidden. So I think, Chris, the lesson here, sometimes history has lessons for us. I think here the lesson is the more things change, the more they stay the same. Presidents and their administrations are not always very forthcoming about weaknesses, diagnoses that presidents get. And like you said, it's understandable sometimes why they do it, for political reasons in FDR's case or JFK's case, for military reasons with people like Woodrow Wilson, maybe FDR as well. But it is something that happens a number of times in presidential history.
And there's a moral and ethical questions that go to this. Would you have voted for a presidential candidate if you knew that for the last 16 years he had suffered strokes capable of interfering with his decision-making ability? What if during the election year the president's physician says, hey, he's good, everything's great, but let's say that he had just recently been diagnosed with congestive heart failure. He had dangerously high blood pressure. AIDS for certain, he wasn't going to survive another term. Would you have voted for him? So those are things that the moral and ethical aspect of that is you let everybody know what's going on. The president has a clean bill of health. But as we know today, no news is really 100% genuine nowadays. No. It's all slanted at an angle. And so will we ever know the true president's health? I mean, President Trump is, he's lost a lot of weight, but they also say that he's a big fan of McDonald's, and he's got the Diet Coke button on his desk, that he can push, to get a Diet Coke just to pop up.
The fish fillet sandwiches.
Yeah. So, I mean, you have to ask yourself, he is in remarkable shape from what it seems. He's got, I tell you this, not talking about political parties or anything like that, but there's a world of difference between the energy of the previous president and the energy of this president.
Yeah.
He is truly like the Energizer Bunny. He goes and goes. I think they say he averages 3 or 4 nights, 4 hours of sleep a night or something. So, a man at his age being able to do that says a lot.
Yeah, if I got 3 or 4 hours of sleep one night, you would not want to be around me the next day. That'd be a bad day. You certainly wouldn't want me to have the button.
There you go. There you go.
That would be a bad day. So anyway, Chris, I think this has been a great episode of History Didn't Know But Should. Hopefully, sort of opening a door here on some information that a lot of people either don't know or just don't think about. That is how presidents and administrations have sometimes worked to downplay or outright cover up health problems of the president. We hope you will share this episode with your family and friends. Check us out on YouTube, Spotify, Anchor, and wherever else you get your podcast. Please leave us a like or a comment as well. Until next time, I'm Ray.
I'm Chris.
And we'll talk to you later.